This is the Berkeley Mayoral Candidate Forum hosted by Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action, Bike Berkeley, and CalDems. My name is Betsy Thagard, and I will be monitoring this forum and asking the questions for Berkeley Neighbors. Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action educates voters about the connection between Berkeley's housing shortage and its increasing climate change emissions. To ease our housing shortage and reduce our emissions, Berkeley Neighbors advocates for more housing of all types and for all income levels. We especially want more housing for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors, and we recognize that fees on market rate housing are an important source of the subsidies for that affordable housing. Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action also calls for zoning changes that will allow construction of infill housing for middle-income workers, such as teachers, firefighters, office workers, and municipal employees. These workers do not qualify for subsidized low-income housing, and we want the people who serve our community to be able to live here. So Ben, would you introduce Bike Berkeley, please?
Happy to do that. My name is Ben Gerhardstein. I am a coordinating committee member with the advocacy group Bike Berkeley. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we want a healthy, equitable, and sustainable transportation system in Berkeley for people of all ages and abilities. 60% of Berkeley's climate emissions are transportation related, and residents want to walk, bike, and use transit to meet their daily needs. That said, many are forced to drive because we haven't provided safe infrastructure and reliable transit. In Berkeley, 40% of trips are by foot or bike, but pedestrians and cyclists experience 80% of the severe and fatal collisions. Those collisions are disproportionately located in historically redlined South and West Berkeley. So we've observed that our sidewalks and street services are broken, the bicycle boulevard network is riddled with unsafe intersections, and none of our arterials have bus lanes. And we need to take bold action to meet our climate, safety, equity, and housing goals. Our current priorities include the quick implementation of the Vision Zero action plan to eliminate severe and fatal collisions in Berkeley by 2028, ensuring that the city implements council's BBMBAP referral to dedicate at least 50% of repaving funds to bikeways and high pedestrian injury streets, and advancing the movement for Black lives by transferring traffic and parking enforcement from the Berkeley Police Department to unarmed personnel in a new equity and safety focused Berkeley Department of Transportation, or BERCDOT. So I want to welcome everybody today on Bike to Wherever Day, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on these topics tonight, mayoral candidates.
Davina?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Davina, and I currently serve as the political director of Cal Berkeley Democrats, the official Democratic chapter of UC Berkeley. And a little bit about our organization is that we're a campus club dedicated to advocating for progressive change, especially through policies and individuals that will act with student interest in mind. Now, speaking onto the topic of students, it's clear that Berkeley is home to many students and many community members, and we see how students with a variety of distinct backgrounds, perspectives, and stories come to this city because of the countless opportunities and welcoming community they are presented with. And we see how eager they are to collaborate with other community members in ways that will keep the cultural diversity and vitality of Berkeley alive. And alternatively, though, we also see this lack of support for students, especially in terms of housing. UC Berkeley ranks the lowest out of 9 in the UC system in the percentage of students that are housed. And this is even more so clearly reflected when you hear the countless stories of students who have to resort to couch surfing or working multiple jobs in order to make ends meet, further showing how housing serves as a barrier to our education, where we have to struggle between balancing our basic needs and our education. And so I look forward to hearing what the candidates have to say tonight, and I'd like to thank everyone here for attending. Thank you.
Okay, this is the way our forum will work. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves, focusing on their ideas about housing, transportation, and climate change in Berkeley. Then the moderators will take turns asking the candidates 2 questions from each organization. Each candidate will be asked the same questions, and they will be called on a rotating basis so that everyone has a chance to go first. After the prepared questions are answered, each moderator will choose 1 question that is submitted anonymously from the audience through the Google form that is found in the chat box. So if you want to submit a question, please go to the chat box and click on the Google form link there. Finally, each candidate will be given 1 minute to sum up their policy ideas regarding how Berkeley can address its housing, transportation, and climate needs. It's important for us to try to stick to our time limits, and so we have a timekeeper tonight, and that is Oren Chayette. Oren, would you please show us how you're going to keep us on time? Oren, are you there?
Is this legible?
Okay, yes. So Oren will hold it up, the sign, when you have 15 seconds left for your time. And then he'll say a sign that says time when you're up. And if we need to, we will interrupt you, but we hope we don't need to do that. Okay, we have 3 candidates here tonight. We have Aiden Hill, Jesse Aragin, and Wayne Xiong. And we're going to start, we're just going to go in alphabetical order and then rotate. So I will ask the first question for Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action.
Betsy, 2-minute intros first.
Oh, I'm so sorry. 2-minute intros. Thank you, Ben. So Aiden, you get to go first. Please give us a 2-minute intro about your ideas on transportation, climate, and housing in Berkeley.
Hi, everyone. My name's Aiden Hill. I use they, them pronouns. I'm here to run for Berkeley Mayor and represent your interests as far as housing and bicycle safety is concerned. So the main reason why I'm running for Berkeley Mayor is that we're at a moment in history where the political decisions we make now will affect the rest of our history. For the next 4 years, your choice in mayor will have direct impact on financing as well as infrastructure development for our city. As humans, we have the ability to protect our commons, the land, the sea, our air quality, but we also have the ability for great chaos. Nuclear weapons, land degradation, and poverty continue to deny our basic human rights. For many of us, true equity is out of reach. Climate change, coronavirus, and digital misinformation continue to divide us. Families sacrifice their peace of mind to meet their basic needs, and many residents have fallen through our social safety nets, relying on mutual aid to get by. Our leaders, now more than ever, must be willing to fight for our future generations and universal human rights across the board. I'm currently a student at UC Berkeley, a dedicated community activist and vice chair of the City of Berkeley Homeless Commission. I focused my education and political activism on local development with an emphasis on climate resilience. In 2017, for example, I joined the California Public Interest Research Group and influenced lawmakers to support the plastic bag ban, protecting our oceans from future single-use plastics. And when smog from the Paradise Fires came to Berkeley, I redirected my campaign funds from 2018 to disaster preparedness responses. I went out of city because we didn't have emergency masks to bring them to the Southside community, focusing on parks as temporary refuge spaces during emergencies. And in 2019, I was appointed to the Homeless Commission promoting legislation, urging our city to prioritize Measure O and Measure P funds. I hope throughout this discussion, you'll hear a little bit more about my transportation values, as well as my ideas to make accessibility more available in Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you, Aiden. Jesse?
Well, good evening. I'm proud to serve as your mayor, and the core focus of your organization, housing and climate action, are 2 areas where I'm deeply passionate about and have demonstrated leadership over the past 16 years in public office. These issues are also deeply personal to me. I'm a lifelong tenant. Growing up in San Francisco, my family faced displacement on several occasions. That is why I've dedicated my life to fighting for economic and social justice. I believe that housing is a human right and no one should lose their home. I'm also currently a rent-controlled tenant. I'm the first renter to serve as our city's mayor in 30 years. I'm also a millennial. Despite having a good job, at least I certainly think it is, I don't make nearly enough to afford an apartment of my own. I certainly don't make enough to buy a home, a dream that many in my generation may never achieve. This is fundamentally wrong. We cannot shut the doors of opportunity to the next generation with the decisions we make today. And during my time in Berkeley, I've been a leader on housing. As a student leader, I fought the university to build more housing close to campus. On the rent board, I worked to defend rent control and expand renter protections. And on the Housing Commission, I helped fund hundreds of new units of low-income housing on our corridors. I am a proven leader on affordable housing and I'm the only candidate who secured millions of dollars in funding to build affordable housing and preserve existing housing. On the Berkeley City Council, I led efforts to establish our affordable housing fee, strengthen inclusionary zoning, prevent displacement, pass measures UN and measures OMP, and expand housing opportunities through the Fair Chance Housing Ordinance, our missing middle study, and planning for new housing around our BART stations. Lastly, as president of the Association of Bay Area Governments, our regional planning agency, I'm leading efforts on regional housing, homelessness, and climate action. I serve on the Alameda County Transportation Commission and East Bay Community Energy, which best positions me to deliver funding for transit, bike and ped, and clean energy for Berkeley. My effective local and regional leadership has earned me the endorsement of our governor, state and local officials, including 7 of the 8 Berkeley City Council members. And they endorse me because they know I can get things done. Being mayor is not about making sweeping pronouncements. It's about doing the work, getting the votes on the council, and getting results. And I'm the only candidate running who has done that.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Wayne?
I'll just make 3 quick points. I think on the issues, most of the folks in this chat are probably aligned with us. I think I've got the right experiences to be mayor of Berkeley. But third, we're going to bring an authentic and different style of politics that will harness the energy of Berkeley. So I'll just talk about each of these briefly. On the issues, I think you all know Jesse's record. Jesse has called zoning reform a declaration of war against Berkeley. We've seen, I believe it's 22 units of affordable housing towards our RENA objectives of the last 3 years under Jesse's administration. We've seen something like 400, 500, 600 above market rate units of housing approved. We're not approving enough housing in Berkeley. And if we don't approve more housing, we're not going to solve the costs of living problems in Berkeley, and we're not going to solve the climate crisis. On climate change, there's big differences between myself and Jesse. Jesse's got a 30-year plan to get to carbon neutrality, a 15-year plan to get to 100% renewable energy. I think we can do both in 5 years. We've got entire nations like Norway that are moving in 10 years. Even big companies like Microsoft and Delta Airlines are going to carbon neutrality in 10 years. If the last couple of weeks haven't warned us that we have to move faster, I don't think anything will. But I think they have. I think the city is ready for a bolder plan. We have the bold plan that the city needs. So with respect to experience, Jesse talks a lot about his experience, and he has a lot of experience as an elected political official. I think a lot of that experience is very relevant and useful, but not for a time of change. And we need to change it. We need someone who has experiences outside of just politics. I've been a community organizer in a public housing project. I've done multi-million-dollar solar financings as a transactional attorney. I'm a published climate researcher. I was a faculty member at Northwestern focusing on climate science. And I've led thousands of activists in confronting climate-abusing industries, risking arrest in the process. I've been arrested a dozen plus times myself. Jesse thinks that's a disqualification for me. I think it's one of my most important qualifications. But last and finally, this is a grassroots campaign. We're not taking corporate PAC money. This is all about the volunteers that are comprising this campaign, driving it forward. We've got 200 plus people working with us, and that's how we're going to create change as a city.
All right, thank you, Wayne. All right, now the first question from Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action. And Jesse, you will be the first to answer. Scientific studies from UC Berkeley have linked Berkeley's housing shortage directly to its climate emissions from cars. Those emissions account for 60% of Berkeley's emissions, and they are going up. Berkeley citizens generally pride themselves on believing in science and advocate science-based decision-making, especially when it comes to climate change. As mayor, how will you translate these scientific findings into specific legislation that will lower Berkeley's transportation climate change emissions?
Well, as you know, transportation emissions account for 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And so we need to do this in several ways. Building more housing along our transit corridors and around our BART stations. And I'm proud to have led the effort to look at building at least over 1,000 units of housing at the North Berkeley and Ashby BART stations. We need to look at increasing density on University Avenue, San Pablo Avenue, and we need to look at increasing density in our residential neighborhoods. We need to open up our neighborhoods to new housing opportunities. Our new regional housing needs allocation is going to require that we plan for 6,000 to 7,000 additional units. And I know that because I've led the effort to create this RENA and make sure that we're distributing housing equitably throughout the region. We need to decarbonize our building and transportation sectors. So that means investing more in transit, micro-mobility, improving the safety of our streets. And then we also need to not only make sure new buildings are all electric and are not committing emissions, achieving zero net energy, but also to make sure that we can convert our existing homes as well.
Thank you. Wayne, you're next. And as a reminder, we just have 1 minute for each answer of the questions.
Yeah, I think what Jesse said is right. The problem is just a couple years ago, he was calling the bill that would upzone transit corridors a declaration of war against Berkeley. So you have to ask yourself, who's going to be a principled supporter of these sorts of reforms? Because if we continue on the path we're on, I mean, what happened in the last few weeks is going to be the future of this entire planet. So what we like to do is beyond upzoning transit corridors, which I think everybody in Northern California is now on board with. Let's try more innovative stuff, like having an electric shuttle similar to the Emerald Go-Round that's completely free of charge. Accelerating the timeline that Gavin Newsom set for electric cars, zero emissions cars in Berkeley to something like 2025 or 2022. If the entire state of California can move by 2035, why can't Berkeley move 10 years faster? Berkeley's always led. We have to continue to lead. And the problem is, Jesse is not someone who's a dyed-in-the-wool environmentalist. He doesn't believe in his heart of hearts. So he's not going to fight the way we need to fight and be bold the way we need to be bold to address these issues. I will.
Thank you. Aiden, your turn.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I really appreciate it. As a current UC Berkeley student, I definitely have access to all the research and technology as well as the researchers that are there currently. But to make this brief, my policy recommendations to make transportation more accessible in the city center around 4 things: bicycle safety, transit and traffic circles, accessibility, as well as connectivity and efficiency. So as far as bicycle safety, I really encourage to provide free and community service bicycles for tourists, residents, and others who don't have them so they can ride around town pollution free. Likewise with transit safety, I encourage the implementation of traffic calming methods that are designed to protect local streets and make safe speeds available. And that's especially important with our communities that have children. Accessibility. We need to encourage ADA compliance with regards to accessibility, making sure that there are frequent stops and there's relatively accessibility that comes to them. And in connectivity, we have to provide that easy to understand and thorough information concerning our mass transit schedules. Until we have all of these things, we might not be able to encourage calming transit measures. But I encourage you to listen to the rest of the debate.
Thank you, Aiden. Wayne?
Wayne already answered. I think
Wayne
Wayne
already answered.
Question, but
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, yes, next, Wayne will be the first to answer the next question from Bike Berkeley.
All right. So Berkeley's streets and sidewalks have suffered from years of deferred maintenance. How should the city raise the many millions of dollars it needs to make our streets safe for walking and biking, while also correcting historic geographic inequities?
So I think part of the problem is just efficient use of funds. I mean, the contractors I've talked to who look at bids that have been done on Berkeley public infrastructure projects all tell me that we're paying 2 to 3 times amount that we should be paying on just basic things like concrete. So we can get some efficiency gains just by opening things up a little bit, auditing how much we're spending on various projects. But you're right, we need more money too. And as a bicyclist who has felt your pain very vividly on a daily basis when I'm riding along Cedar, I know we need more. We need more resources put into this project. So I think we should consider taxing large corporations, the wealthiest homeowners, and the wealthiest people in Berkeley much, much more, and use every tool in the toolkit to do that. That means a gross receipts tax on large corporations, like what San Francisco passed with Prop C in 2018. That means considering a wealth tax. Palo Alto is considering this, and it's going to face some constitutional challenges. But I'm a litigator, a former law professor. I'm happy to fight that in court. And frankly, the one area of the American economy that's doing quite well is the stock market. It's probably the one area where we can most plausibly get the revenue we need to improve our public infrastructure.
Thank you. Aiden?
Yeah, at the heart of your question, it really is an understanding that there are partnerships that exist that can provide financing for this. And that extends from the federal, state, and local level of governance. The biggest thing that we have to make sure is that our taxpayers are not double taxed, making sure that the burden of these resources don't go on individual residents. And we really do need to prioritize investments in general welfare. And that includes both environmental and social costs. So I encourage direct investments in regard to our budgeting proposals. specifically on a regional level. Likewise, I really encourage the assistance of plumbing upgrades on private property to prevent and reduce contamination from pipes, which leads to different waste management treatments that we need. And when budget deficits occur, we should really acknowledge that the city auditor's department has a fundamental role to play. When we talk about the future of finance in Berkeley, I really hope that we can create a Bank of Berkeley, or at least a regional bank, to help the upfront costs for this. And all these upfront costs would be on pay-as-we-go revenue streams, because we're currently facing a budget deficit right now. And so thank you for this opportunity to answer that question.
Thank you, Aiden. Jesse?
I just have to first say it's really unfortunate that my opponent attacks and distorts my record. And that's because he has no record of public service or leadership in this community. I think it's really unfair to say that I don't care about climate change. I think I've demonstrated that in my public service in this community for the past 16 years. So, I have a record of votes and of accomplishments that I can point to around the issues of climate change and housing. That's the record I stand on. In answer to your question, however, Measure GG would tax rideshare companies to provide $900 to $1 million a year, which I would like to use to improve our roads and invest in complete streets projects. I want to make sure that Measure T1, we're prioritizing those dollars for complete streets projects and completing our bike plan. The Beanie BAP initiative, which I supported, would prioritize repaving money on the high injury networks and bicycle boulevards, which is where they should be, which are most heavily traveled and would reduce the risk to pedestrians and bicyclists. And lastly, on a regional level, we need to look at congestion pricing as a way to generate revenue. And my service on the Alameda County Transportation Commission best positions me to deliver for Berkeley.
All right, thank you. So Aiden, you will be the first to answer the next question from CalDems.
All right, thank you, candidates, for your answers so far. So my first question is, if elected, how do you plan on encouraging the UC to pursue greater action in resolving housing affordability issues among students both living on and off campus?
Aiden?
That's a great question. Yeah, as someone who's been in UC Berkeley for the last 4 years, I definitely understand the basis of this question. So with UC specifically, the greatest affordable option that is available right now are the student co-ops. However, the student co-ops typically are not managed by the communities themselves. So as a policymaker, I encourage live-in management probabilities in which the citizens themselves can offer amenities for public utilities, creating those cleanings, so groundskeepers, but even more so when it comes to the residential halls right now, because of coronavirus, students aren't even aware of the actual price points of those buildings. Right now, students are being charged $4,000 a month in some of those residential buildings, and that's not affordable. So we really do need to make sure as the city, we have alternative options. And that means co-housing agreements, getting the nonprofit sector involved, making sure that we have those low-scale budgeting probabilities so students can get the education that they're seeking. And I look forward to talking to you more about those initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse?
Well, this is an area where I got my start in political activism, public service in the Berkeley community as a student and as the ASUC City Affairs Director. And as a relatively recent graduate of UC Berkeley, I really feel it's important that we represent the interests of students who make up around 30% of our city's population. And so as mayor, we've moved several important initiatives forward on student housing. The More Student Housing Now resolution was the framework for the rezoning that's happening right now at the Planning Commission, which I strongly support. The South Side is the most appropriate location, in addition to our other corridors and BART stations, to densify and to expand housing. We look at how we can leverage that to get affordable student housing. We need to expand partnerships with the co-ops. And I support the university's efforts to build housing on the 9 sites they identified, including People's Park, because we need thousands of beds of student housing to make up for this deficit. It's unacceptable that students are facing homelessness, and this requires partnership between the city and the university, partnership which I've been able to foster successfully as mayor these past 4 years.
Thank you. Wayne?
So I think I'm the only person who's actually serving on the faculty of the university, so I can lend some insight into how things actually work from the inside. And it's kind of shocking, but in my experience, large universities don't act that differently than corporations in regard to seeking revenue. And that's got to change. They have to have different metrics. It's not just about financial viability or the size of the endowment. We need a different set of metrics to drive university decision making. And I think the university should have on a big dashboard, maybe on a public website, the cost of living, and say, this is how much it costs for a student to live in Berkeley. And this is our target over the next 5 years, how low we're going to get it. And if we make that an objective of the university, then we'll see progress. But the second thing I think we need to do is get the university behind the broader fight against economic inequality. Too often the university is doing things that reinforce gentrification, that reinforce income inequality. We need the entire force of the university, the chancellor, all the star professors saying, let's change our tax system. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the university does. The university doesn't have enough money to address the housing crisis. To address the housing crisis, we need tax reform.
Thank you. Okay, now I will ask the second question from Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action. And Jesse, you will be the first to answer. The Berkeley City Council voted unanimously to adopt the North Berkeley and Ashby-BART MOU and to proceed with a community advisory process to develop housing on the parking lots of these two BART stations. That process is currently underway. In the meantime, the Planning Commission, led by the appointees of the current mayor and the Ashby-BART council member, are proposing to adopt next week an add-a-line plan that directly interferes with the CAG process by mandating 100% affordable housing at the Ashby-BART station. BART has repeatedly asked the Planning Commission not to interfere with the CAG process in this manner. As mayor, how will you resolve this conflict?
Well, those of you that participated in the last Planning Commission meeting know that I sent a communication to the Planning Commission urging the Commission to not circumvent the CAG process. And as the architect of the CAG process, it was my item, along with Councilmember Bartlett and Kesarwani, that initiated this planning process. I think we need to honor the joint process that we developed with BART, which was ratified unanimously by the Berkeley City Council. Let's dwell on that, unanimously by the Berkeley City Council and the BART Board of Directors. So I oppose circumventing the process that we have developed with BART. I am communicating to my Planning Commission representative, and certainly when this comes to the Berkeley City Council, and ultimately we will vote on the plan, I will make sure that we do not put in place language that circumvents this process. Let the CAG do its work. Let's make decisions based on feasibility analysis and economics and community input. And we'll have that conversation soon at the Planning Commission at the City Council. Thank you. Wayne?
I think this is emblematic of a broader problem that we're seeing in this entire YIMBY-NIMBY debate. And, if you look at what's happened in American politics across the nation, and certainly in Berkeley, anytime there's a polarizing issue, whether it's housing, climate justice, whatever it is, nuclear power, people draw lines, they form camps, and then they fight, even when there's a lot of common ground to be made. So I think the most important thing we can do is try to avoid that sort of polarization in politics by not attacking the other side, by trying to find common ground wherever we can, and by listening to everyone. And one of the big reasons I decided to run is because Berkeley politics just isn't very inclusive. There are a lot of folks in South Berkeley and West Berkeley, in the neighborhood that I live in, that just don't feel like they're included in the process. And giving people a voice is really important. If we do two things, give everyone a voice in the process and make them feel like a stakeholder in the process, we can move forward in the YIMBY-NIMBY debate and not have delays upon delays upon delays in every project that Berkeley is trying to build.
Thank you. Aidan.
Yeah, theoretically, this should really be a decision based off of the residential concerns. As a policymaker, as someone running for mayor, it's really my opinion that I have to give a third party, non-really biased decision when it comes to issues such as this. And so what I can say about this is that I really do encourage industrial and commercial developers providing housing instead of parking spaces in new developments. That's something that's very important to me. Likewise, I think the Planning Commission does a great job, and actually they should look at the archaeological and architectural framework of these housing developments. But I really want to mention why I'm supporting stuff like this. So in 2016, sorry, current mayor, but you said that housing shouldn't have been built on People's Park. And for the last 4 years, I've been having to work with those residents directly, because you don't understand that if you build on People's Park, if you build on green spaces, specifically in Berkeley, you ruin the oxygen quality for our entire neighborhood. And it's types of that decision-making without community input that is really destructive for our city. Instead, I was supportive of the Berkeley Housing Now. I just said, don't build on our only green space. And like the same way as I support on the buildings on the BART stations, including Ashby BART, but don't displace the residents that get their money there, because they're workers too. They need a place to serve their communities. We have to make inclusive decisions with residents, businesses, BART operators together. And until we have that, we won't have equity moving forward.
Thank you. All right, Wayne, you will be the first to answer the next question from Walk Bike Berkeley.
All right, question number 2 for y'all is whether you support creating a Berkeley Department of Transportation, and if yes, how do you envision BerkDOT advancing safety, equity, and climate goals simultaneously?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I haven't thought about that carefully. I mean, my first instinct is always, whenever we're trying to create something new, is it already redundant with something that's already been done, right? Is something Alameda County is doing, is something that already exists in Berkeley, already performing some of those functions. I will say I agree with you that transit in Berkeley is not where it should be, obviously. I mean, we need more pedestrian friendly and bike friendly districts. And if that's the only way for us to get there, then I would support a Department of Transportation. But before doing that, I'd probably want to engage our community members and, frankly, the staff members in city government to see what needs are not being filled. So my answer, this might be unsatisfactory, is I don't know. I'd have to look at it more carefully to say for sure.
Thank you. Aiden?
Yeah, I support the Berkeley DOT. I think that a Department of Transportation is very inclusive to the needs of our community, specifically since we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And the best way to do that is making mass transportation accessible. What I'd like to see this commission do is really focus on how do we make sure that students, residents, and commuters from across our state have access to Berkeley's resources. I know in the Berkeley Hills, there's very much a deficiency and reliance on cars because we don't have adequate public transport there. We should really effectively try to change where the greatest needs of our transportation is available. And another big part of this is we have to make sure that we have accessibility options for both elders and disabled people across our community. Both those populations of people provide extensive needs met for our city. And until we can make sure that elders have right-of-way and our disabled people have accessible transportation, wheelchairs, walkers, and even walking canes, how can we make sure that transportation is available? So I definitely think BerkDOT can have a more inclusive lens, and I look forward as mayor to working with them to make sure.
Thank you. Jesse?
Well, I'm ready to commit today. I strongly support BerkDOT. I was a co-sponsor of that legislation. I think it's groundbreaking. Since we introduced it, cities throughout the country have reached out to Berkeley, and that is what Berkeley does. We introduce first in the nation policies that transform systems. And this is one way that we can not only ensure racial justice, but climate justice in our approach to traffic enforcement and parking enforcement in Berkeley. It makes no sense that the parking enforcement is in the police department. It makes no sense that people with a gun are stopping people for routine traffic stops. We know Philandro Castle and many other African-American men and women have died at the hands of police through routine traffic stops. We have to change our approach. So our current transportation division is broken. That's why we need a department, an entire department that's focused on the implementation of Vision Zero, and that's working to advance projects, do enforcement in a way that is racially just, and that is decriminalizing traffic stops. There's a lot of answers that we need to figure out. Legal issues, operational issues, but I'm committed to working with all of you to make it happen.
Thank you. All right. Aiden, you will be the first to answer the last question from CalDems.
All right, so my second question is, how would you approach balancing the housing needs of the growing student community with the needs of existing community members who are at risk of displacement?
Great question. So with the growing student community, we really do need to make sure that UC Berkeley is following their housing criteria or their student enrollment criteria. Right now, UC Berkeley is on a trend of over-enrolling students, and this is really dangerous, especially in the time of coronavirus. Not only do we have limited access to account for student housing, but we also don't have the ability to make sure we have a substantial count of students in our city. So when it comes to housing allocations, we definitely need to have an approximate count of how many students are here. But as far as residents are concerned, these students are transitionary. And so that provides a great opportunity to allow students and residents to cohabitate. And so if we can form a public partnership with the University of California, Berkeley to make sure that residents have accessible as well as safe transit housing options and availabilities, and this includes building ADUs for students too, we can make sure that students are housed safely. When I first came to Berkeley, I didn't have those resources. I didn't have a safe area where I can house. In fact, I was pushed into an apartment without a lease and for $600 because it was the cheapest available. But I believe that the city of Berkeley should have a higher priority in making sure our students' lives are safe. And with students coming into our city, our residents even need a stronger collaboration network too, to know the city better. And so I'll leave it at that. I do believe that there should be integration between our neighbors and Berkeley students, because both of us provide so much benefit.
Thank you, Aiden. Thank you. Jesse?
Well, by building more housing close to campus. The fact that UC Berkeley has the lowest ratio of student housing of any UC campus is unacceptable. And the fact the university has not built enough housing for its students over the past 10 years means that it pushes the impact on the broader community, because of course students need to have a place to live. But that creates increasing pressure, which results in displacement of existing residents. So the solution is, let's build more housing close to campus. I support upzoning in the South Side area as proposed by staff. I think we need to have greater density close to campus. The university also needs to build more housing itself. And I think there are ways that we can, through public-private partnerships, or through bonding, through the university Office of the President, to have the resources for the university to build more housing. One of the issues I was involved in when I was a student leader was getting the university to commit to building housing close to campus. And they did that by including in the state housing bond money to build student beds. And they built 1,100 beds of housing. So we need to do everything we can to support the university's efforts. And the city has a responsibility by densifying close to campus to create housing opportunities, including co-ops and other affordable housing opportunities.
Thank you. Wayne?
You know, I think this is not a housing problem first and foremost. It's not an engineering problem. It's a political problem. It's about the relationships between the university and the surrounding community. And I think it's going to have a political solution. I think the way we solve it is by creating more of a neighborly feel. We need to facilitate not just dialogue between the community and students, but genuine relationships. And I'll give you an example. So many of you know Leonard Powell, an elderly Black man who was forced out of his home by the Berkeley city government. He's an example of the displacements happening in the Black community, which has gone from, I think, 30% to 5% over the last few decades. Leonard Powell is a classic example of someone who should be furious at university students, but he's not. He actually loves Cal students right now. And the reason is we organized a bunch of Cal students to help him find legal representation when he was forced out of his home. They got to know him and his family. They've cried together. They've hugged together. They fought together. They got lawyers together. And now Leonard Powell has representation because of a bunch of University of California undergraduates who worked with us to get him legal representation the city of Berkeley was not providing. You have relationships like that, then you can come to political solutions to housing. And if you don't have those relationships and that neighborly feel, it doesn't matter how good your policy is, you're not going to get it done.
Thank you, Wayne. Okay, I will now ask the first question from the audience, and Jesse, you will be the first to answer. Okay. As mayor, what will you do to make it easier for homeowners to build accessory dwelling units on their property?
Well, I'm proud of what we've done over the past few years to streamline the process for ADUs, and I've supported state legislation, which has further streamlined the process, not only at ABAG, but as mayor, trying to reduce permitting barriers. I supported Measure Q, which was on the ballot in 2018, and cast a critical vote to put that measure on the ballot to exempt new ADUs from rent control, because we heard from people that want to build ADUs that was a barrier. And we need to look at what San Jose's doing, which is they're looking at financing and they're looking at further streamlining the process so that it's easier for people to build ADUs. I think this is a way for us to add incremental density in our neighborhoods. And so I think there are a lot of best practices that we can look at to build on the work that we've already done. And I'm proud that we have more ADUs being built now than we did before I came into office, but clearly there's more work we have to do.
Thank you. Wayne.
Yeah, the reality is the city of Berkeley only streamlined its ADU approval process after it was forced to by the state of California, right? I agree that San Jose is a good model. And in San Jose, they have a target of 90 minutes for getting an ADU approved. Anyone who's tried to build an ADU in Berkeley knows that 90 minutes seems like a fantasy to people in Berkeley. So my background is, when I was a law professor, I was in a field called behavioral law and economics. And this is all about how complexity is a cost. We have to make the regulation not just effective, but simple. And in fact, effective and simple are synonymous. If regulation isn't simple, it's not going to be effective. So my goal as mayor is going to be to go through the building code of the city of Berkeley, line by line, and get rid of all the unnecessary decision-making, all the unnecessary provisions, and streamline the entire process, and build a culture in the planning department so they understand, and we all understand as a city government, that our goal is to serve our people. We have to treat every citizen as a client and not a revenue source, not someone to block, but someone to assist and empower. And if we do that, we'll see a lot more ADUs in Berkeley.
Thank you. Aiden.
Yeah, thank you for this question again. So when it comes to ADUs, I've been working towards this since 2018. Actually, I live on Telegraph Avenue near Dwight Avenue, and I've really proposed, well, instead of all of these high rises, why don't we have accessory dwelling units on our commercial properties? Why don't we, where there's a vacant land in front of a rental building, why can't those be ADU units? Why can't the, instead of having cars being housed in the back of buildings, why can't we have ADU units there too? So I have a record for the last 2 years of really pushing forward ADUs. And this really centers around human-centered zoning. And that means rezoning our laws and occupancy buildings that we can meet our residential needs, as well as the commercial and industrial needs of our city. These inflexible building codes that prevent alternative constructions don't necessarily think about the health and safety measures that we have, as well as it also discourages the use of green space around us too. And so what I want to bring to the table is really retrofit our existing buildings for energy conservation, and the laws towards that will definitely help.
Thank you, Aiden. Thank you. Okay, Wayne, you will be the first to answer the next question from the audience. Ben from Walk Bike Berkeley.
Great. So it's Bike to Wherever Day. So I thought I would go ahead and ask an audience question on biking. In Berkeley, it is normal for cars to whiz by bikers, even on bike boulevards. What is your plan to create a network of bike routes safe enough for users of all ages? What steps would you take to separate bikes and motor vehicles, or to tame vehicle traffic on bicycle routes?
Wayne.
I am a big fan of using social norms and huge signals about social norms to encourage people to engage in better behavior. Because you can use punitive measures, you can tax people, you can try and punish them, and that usually just creates a lot of discontent, and it's often extremely ineffective. But if we can elevate the norm that bicycling is a thing we all do in Berkeley, which I am myself a bicyclist, and you could expect a bike to work every day. If we put signs out elevating bicycling, if we talk about how all our friends are bicyclists and how important bike safety is, and if we talk about flagship cases where someone has been hurt, seriously, and I've actually been in a bicycle accident myself. Someone turned left on me too fast, T-boned me on my bike, still have cartilage damage in my right knee from that accident. But just elevating these issues in social discourse is probably the most important thing we can do effectively to address bike safety. You can count on me using the bully pulpit of the mayor's office to make sure we do that.
Thank you. Aiden.
Yes, so with this question, it really revolves around safe street outcomes. Some of these things that can be changed is simply moving where the stop sign is and making four-way stop signs. That's a simple solution to bicycle safety. Another solution is really prioritizing our traffic circles. We really have to make sure our streets, neighborhoods, and commercial districts are more pedestrian friendly. And the reason why they're not is because we encourage automobiles to be able to take the center lanes. They have the right of ways in many of our neighborhoods. So if we supported public transportation, if we supported cooperatives, for example, the Missing Link Bicycle Cooperative, which sells wholesale bikes to their community, if we build these connections stronger, we can actually make public transportation for visitors and others to be accessible. We have to work on ADA compliance, and that ADA compliance really creates small walkable auto-free zones. It can discourage unnecessary auto use by limiting the free parking in non-residential areas. And we have to really encourage that bicycles have the right of way as well as pedestrians moving forward when it comes to making safer streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse.
Well, education is important, but we as a local government have power over the physical infrastructure that we move on. And so that's why it's important that we prioritize the safety of bicyclists and pedestrians. We have some of the highest bike to work rates and pedestrian rates in California, but we also have some of the highest collision rates, and that's unacceptable. If we want to achieve our goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, this is a critical strategy. So several things. I support Idaho stops and looking at ways to deprioritize rolling stops to deal with sort of the issue of bikes moving and enforcement. We need to implement the network of low stress bike lanes throughout the city. And we need to do that through protected lanes, through implementing a road diets in some of our major corridors. We've done that on Adeline Street as part of Measure T1. And I want to do that on more major streets in Berkeley. We need to expand our network of bicycle boulevards and look at ways that we can calm traffic. All these things are really essential to improve the safety of our streets. And we need to leverage regional funds to do that as well.
Thank you. Aiden, you'll be the first to answer the next question from the audience presented by CalDems.
All right, so this question is as follows. Last week, a man stepped into a boba shop in Berkeley with an axe and knife on hand and blowtorched a group of students. Not only that, but the students took it upon themselves to de-escalate the situation. How do you propose to increase public safety while continuing to listen to the calls to defund the police?
Yeah, that event was really scary. I remember talking to many of the businesses on Telegraph Avenue who were really surprised that that happened. So how do we make sure that public safety is encouraged? I think those students did the right thing, trying to de-escalate this situation, trying to stop them from going into the businesses. The blowtorch especially was very difficult. Because that person was armed with a weapon, I think that it was an appropriate response for the police department to de-escalate that. The whole point about de-escalating the police, it's not just about saying the names of Black people like myself, it's about actually creating a better quality of life for them. And so the fact that that person was uninjured, that's a good sign. The fact that the person could have gotten mental health support, that should have happened. And so when we talk about public safety, we have to really talk about the residents who need help the most. And so I commend the police for doing the job to making sure those people were safe, because it definitely was a dangerous situation. But how do we make sure that person doesn't harm our communities in the future? That comes from restitution, that comes from rehabilitation, and that comes from mental health support.
Thank you. Jesse.
It was horrible. It's unacceptable. And think as an example of the mental health crisis that we have on our streets. Our mental health system is broken. And I'm sorry, but this person is not in a position to make their own informed care decisions. I think we need to look at expanded conservatorship in Alameda County, because there are some people who are dying on the streets and it's unacceptable. And we need to expand the network of crisis response and mental health care for people on the streets. But with respect to the public safety response, we are now implementing bike officer beat on Telegraph in downtown Berkeley, which will expand our ability to respond to crimes as they occur. And I think in that case, that person should be arrested, and stay-away orders are the appropriate means to prevent somebody who poses a threat to public safety. But generally, we need to invest in our mental health system. We need to make sure people get the care that they need, and we need to invest in expanded crisis response, which is why I support the specialized care unit that Councilmember Bartlett put forward.
Thank you. Wayne.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that Jesse points out the mental health crisis we're seeing in this city, because part of the reason we're seeing that is because we've criminalized homelessness in the city. And if you punish people for being poor, if you punish people for being mentally ill, then this is the result that you get. So we can look at the immediate consequence of this horrific violent action and say, gosh, what do we do about that? Or we can look at the precursor to this incident and last 4 years of ineffective policy on mental health and homelessness. Unlike Jesse, we're not going to criminalize vagrancy if I'm mayor. Unlike Jesse, we're not going to ban RVs from the city, sending some families to the streets in tent encampments. We're going to give people supportive housing. We're going to give people mental health care, because there's an enormous amount of evidence that when you give people supportive housing and mental health care, it reduces crime. Look, everybody agrees that if someone's blow torturing someone on the street, they need to be arrested. They need to be taken off the street. You know, even if they're insane and they have a criminal defense to whatever the allegation of a criminal action is, they need to be off the street. But the fundamental difference between myself and Jesse is what we do before that. And what I think we do before that is use research-based interventions to get people in the homes.
Thank you. So now, lastly, we will go to our 1-minute summaries from the candidates, in which they can tell us what they plan as mayor to do about Berkeley's housing, transportation, and climate issues. And the first to summarize in 1 minute, please, is Jesse.
Well, I've spent most of this forum talking about my positive vision for Berkeley and my record. I didn't spend it attacking my opponents. And I think it's unfortunate that this race has turned into such a negative race. I think we should stand on our record and our positive vision for the city of Berkeley. And my vision is a city that is affordable and equitable and sustainable. We need to build thousands of new homes in our city along our transit corridors and at our BART stations. We need to protect existing tenants from displacement. My work on a regional level as president of ABAG and on regional committees best positions me to advance these policies in Berkeley and regionally. And we need to take bold action on climate change now. I agree. 30 years from now is not enough. We need to accelerate our response to climate change. And that means decarbonizing our transportation and building sector, getting people out of gas guzzling cars and banning the sale of those cars, like Ben Gould has suggested in Berkeley and the governor is moving to implement. And we need to work on expanding our urban forests, promoting zero waste. We need to really promote a sustainable and equitable community. That's what I want to do. I have the sole endorsement of the Sierra Club because of my positive record on the environment. I'd be honored to have your support.
Thank you. Wayne?
So I agree completely with Jesse. Let's keep this positive. And I hope you commit to that, Jesse, because it hasn't been that positive for me so far. And I think we know what emails we're talking about right now. But let me just point out two big differences between myself and Jesse. And I don't think policy differences are personal attacks. One is you look at the actual housing that's been created in Berkeley. I'm looking at the RENA allocations and the permits that have been approved. We've had 10, 1, and 11 units of below market rate housing over the last 3 years under Jesse's administration. We have 1,000 units of below market housing we're trying to build. There are 22 that we've actually given permits for. That's got to change. That will change if I'm mayor. We're going to build more. We're going to build more affordable housing. We're going to make sure we hit our RENA objectives and frankly increase our RENA objectives. But second, on climate change, I am so glad to hear Jesse saying that 30 years is too slow, but that took me running to get us to that point. And when I said you wanted to die in the wool environmentalist, I wasn't a personal attack, Jesse. It's just about your record. I'm a 20-year climate activist. This is the mission of my life. This is what I've been doing every single moment of my life for the last 20 years. And it's one of the reasons why you can count on me to fight to make sure we bring a wartime mobilization against climate change if we win this campaign.
Thank you. Aiden?
Hi, yes. No one targeted me, so I guess that assumes that I'm doing my record by the book. But to talk a little briefly about why you should vote for me as mayor and what my vision for Berkeley is that I am someone of a different generation. I am someone who would be the youngest mayor, the first trans mayor in the United States history, the first student mayor in Berkeley, and I really have the on-the-site work of making sure that both climate change and social justice and equity are available. By talking about urban forests, I'm the only candidate here who has worked directly with our forestry, the East Bay pesticide alert, as well as the People's Park community. I've put my body defending trees from being cut without public notice from the university, and I would do that more to protect the rest of our forestry in Berkeley. As mayor, my budget priorities very quickly both include environmental and social costs. I really prioritize healthcare, public utilities, and environmental protections. I encourage And if you notice on the questionnaires, I'm the only candidate that outlined what to do for every single income level in Berkeley when it is regards to their housing. So you can trust that I have a vision looking forward to the future of Berkeley, a vision for our children, and a vision for all of the marginalized groups in Berkeley to have a seat at the table, because I believe everyone deserves it.
Thank you. And thank you very much to all three of our candidates for your candid answers to all of our questions. Really appreciate your taking the time to be here, and everybody vote. Okay, and that is the end of our forum. Thank you so much.